Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm Mark Graven. We are joined today by Gemma Jones. She is an improvement coach, a trainer, and a visual facilitator based in the UK and working globally. Gemma started her career in engineering and quickly found a passion for improvement, like I think most of us listening to the podcast, and including me as host. That passion is something we're going to be able to talk about today. Gemma spent 20 years in manufacturing across numerous industries, and then in 2018, she left to build her own business. So her mission is to help organizations and individuals be the best they can be by helping people see, helping people think, and helping people change. I love that. So Gemma, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, Mark. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's very nice to have you here. And, I've had a couple opportunities to run across you on Zoom. We run in some similar circles around continuous improvement these last couple of years. So it's great to finally have you here on the podcast. And, as we normally do, I guess the closest thing I have to standard work is asking people their continuous improvement origin story. So Gemma, let me throw that question to you.
Cool. Yeah, this is really nice to think about, actually, to look back. So I started in mechanical engineering. I did a mechanical engineering degree. As part of that degree, I did a year in industry. And so I learned about some of the continuous improvement things in my degree in mechanical engineering. We learned about Deming and about CI and, lots of kind of the background. And it was quite theoretical. And I was interested in all of that, but I didn't really understand it. And then I went to work in industry for a year, in my third year, and I really realized how actually we can use these things. And when I went to, started working with people and started understanding that actually it's not about the tools, it's about the people and the relationships and the trust and the respect. So I really loved that part of it. I was really passionate about it. I remember going back for my final 2 years of university and having a completely different mindset about all the things I was learning, and absolutely loved it. And then when I graduated and went to work, properly got into manufacturing, I took it forward from there. And I guess I was really lucky early on in my career. I was working for a company based in South Wales near Cardiff. And we were really lucky to be working with some people from Cardiff Business School. So a guy called, he's Professor Nick Rich. I was very lucky. He was my mentor. He wrote one of the chapters of the book, Lean Thinking, or was instrumental in one of the chapters. And he was my mentor for probably 2 years, for a day a week. And I didn't realize how lucky I was at the time. I didn't write down enough of what he said. Didn't realize quite what an amazing opportunity that was. But he really instilled in me the notion of improvement is all about people, and about relationships, and really you need to spend the maximum amount of time that you can out on the floor talking to people, and helping them to think through and helping them to achieve. It's not about you doing things, it's not about you solving the problems, it's about you helping people to solve their problems. And so I was very lucky to have that to be instilled in me at a very young age, and I think I've brought that forward into my career ever since. Yeah,
there's some great foundations there to kind of go back and explore a little more about a couple of the things you brought up. Not everybody gets that Deming foundation. I was fortunate to have some of that through my father, who worked at General Motors and got to go to a Deming 4-day seminar. It wasn't really being taught formally in my undergraduate industrial engineering, but having some exposure and the ability to go read some of Deming's work was, I think, a really strong foundation. I'd be curious to hear more reflections from you on that Deming foundation.
I think it really underpins so much. And like you say, lots of people don't necessarily read about that or learn about that. And I don't think I understood how important it was then. And I've got my notes from my degree, and I look back on it now and I can see so much more in what I wrote and what I learned about than what I understood at the time. But no, I think it's a really good basis. I think the more you can understand that, the more the rest of it makes sense. The linkages and the relationships and the people and the principles. Yeah, I think it makes a massive difference. It's so much more depth to the learning.
Yeah, I mean, the Toyota people talk about how influential Dr. Deming was. Like, to me, this is not a history lesson. It's part of understanding at least one of the major influences on Toyota. And you talked also about respect for people. I think that was a strong thread in what Dr. Deming, taught about. In many ways, showing respect for, the frontline workers are often put in a bad system. Part of respect would be not blaming, good people in a bad system. And part of respect is, this is to me more direct Toyota type language of creating a system where people can be successful. I think that's very deep or very, very clear in Deming's writing and work.
Absolutely.
But to have, as you mentioned, great coaches, that's something not everybody is fortunate to have, depending on their workplace environment. Can you think of any times where that coaching really hit home about it being all about people and working with and working through others?
Well, I think back to my early days in my career, whilst in my degree and also after I'd graduated. Now, I'd done a mechanical engineering degree, but I was actually going to go and do art. I was going to go to art college, but my physics teacher told me I must not go to art college and I must go to engineering school. But part of the reason that I hesitated was I don't have a big background. I'd never taken a car apart with my dad, like a lot of my counterparts in the engineering degree had. I'd never taken a lawnmower apart. I didn't really understand how gearing systems worked. I didn't really understand how, cars and engines and things worked. So there was a lot of practical knowledge that I didn't have when I went into engineering, and I really felt that. And then when I went out to work and I was looking at machinery and manufacturing equipment, I was very conscious that I didn't really know how it worked. So I had a real imposter syndrome problem of, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how I'm supposed to help these people understand the problems or solve the problems. And what I realized quickly was actually, I didn't need to know those things, but it was almost me learning how to cope with what I saw as my inadequacy or my shortcomings, that I developed this, I didn't develop it, obviously, it's a known thing, but asking questions rather than giving people answers. I realized I could get by doing that. And I was really lucky, I think, that happened, because I think that made me coach people from early on and I didn't know I was doing that, and I hadn't been taught how to do that. And it was probably, if I look back now, it was probably a bit rusty, but it was that notion of coaching them and helping them side by side, helping them figure it out rather than telling them what to do. And I think that's a strength now. I used to think that was me overcoming a weakness.
I love the way you say that. You're right. When you can't tell people what to do, I mean, that can be a blessing, because when I think of so many other workplaces where people are promoted up through the ranks, whether it's in manufacturing or healthcare, and they fall into that trap of knowing too much about how the work is done and staying. So, I mean, do you find yourself in a situation now where kind of drifting, or we're building upon your origin story? Do you find yourself in situations now where you're having to try to help leaders and coach them through recognizing that maybe they have this pattern of more telling, less asking?
Helping people to see when they're jumping to give advice or to tell rather than asking, I think is actually quite a key part of what I do now when I'm coaching with leaders. And not just with leaders, as in top of the company or senior company. If people are leading projects, or if they're CI practitioners and they're leading a team or a particular activity, it's the same thing. And sort of being able to notice when you jump to do that, I think, is a skill in itself. Asking questions and then shutting up, is a skill in itself. And that is something that I'm often helping people to observe that and notice that, because a lot of us, I don't think we necessarily realize we're doing it. So having someone to help you see that can really help, I think.
I mean, that's a big part of what a coach can do, whether it is a music coach or I imagine a golf coach or an art coach. Yeah,
Yeah.
to help you notice, or at least maybe people then develop the ability, once it's pointed out to them, that
Yeah.
ability to be more self-observant, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think, yeah, we can become more, we can realize that we can not see something's happening, but once we've realized when we do it, we know the triggers, we know what it feels like, we know some of the language to look out for, then we can become much more aware.
Yeah. Now, you talked about not taking things apart when you were a kid. I didn't do that either. And so I lacked some of that, maybe a practical experience. But when you get into an industrial setting, you, like you said, as you reflected on, you learn what you have to know. Like, I started at General Motors, and they sent us to a class where we spent a day or two putting together an engine by hand. Like, okay, that was interesting. I don't know how much that really helped me do my job. Like, maybe it kind of grounded me in, okay, this is the product and this is what it does. That's fine. But it wasn't really, most of us have driven a car, so it wasn't really that theoretical of what the engine does. But like you said, relying on coaching, questions, helping people through that. It's great things to learn. But then when you think about coaching and asking questions, that makes me think of some of your more recent work around the Toyota Kata approach. And you're a co-founder of a group with Tracy Defoe, who was here on episode 467. Tell us a little bit about that group. I'll let you say what it is. And
So the group, we're called the Kata Girl Geeks, and we're a group for women across the world wanting to learn more about scientific thinking and the practice of Kata. We started back in 2020. I'd done some training in Kata. I'd had the books on my shelf for 5-6 years, thought I understood it, thought it was, I've seen this before. Long history in lean. I would talk about lean as being my religion, and this was my thing. So I went and did some training to learn more about Toyota Kata. Finished that training, then tried to use it with clients and realized very quickly, how hard it was. Looks really simple on the outside. Actually, it's quite hard to practice. So I felt like I was on the verge of almost putting it to one side because I'd realized how hard it was. But I reached out to Tracy, who I knew was a big advocate for Kata, and asked if she would help me. She offered to coach me. She coached me very generously. She'd never met me before. She coached me for 6 weeks. And then when we finished that coaching, we decided we wanted to, how do I continue? How do we continue? Let's keep meeting once a week. And hey, shall we invite some other women? We were both involved with the Women in Lean group at the time. I know you're a big advocate for Women in Lean. So we reached out to members of there, said, is anyone else interested in learning about Kata and scientific thinking? And a few people joined us. And I just thought that would be us. And we would, just potter along for a few months. But actually the group has grown and grown, and now we've got over 100 women who come together every work day. Actually, we have learning groups who come together every work day, but we have 3 meetings every week as a whole. And we've got over 100 women across the world. It's incredible. I mean, it amazes me every week. I'm incredibly proud of the group. We talk about how many coaches we've grown, and we've now grown over 20 coaches. So there's over 20 women on the planet who previously had no coaching experience, who are now fully competent, confident coaches, making a difference in the world. And that means a huge amount to me.
Yeah, that's great. And how would you describe or articulate the benefit of having groups kind of created by, for, and of women? So
I think we came out of Women in Lean, which evolved because of Karen Ross being at conferences and looking up at the stage and not seeing any women. And we've kept to that in the category. We have had a few moments where we've been criticized openly and privately for only being open to women. And we've had a lot of conversations about whether we should open the group and whether we should make it open to anyone. But the reason we've kept it that way is, well, there's 2 reasons, I guess, 2 big reasons. One is we are, women supporting women, which is a really beautiful thing. But more importantly is, when you go to conferences, lean conferences, Kata conferences, and you look at the stage and you look at the audience, there's a majority of men there, a big majority of men there. There aren't that many women. There aren't that many women on the stage. There aren't that many women talking about lean and Kata in a public place. Mm-hmm. And we want to build that, and we want to strengthen that. And we've seen the benefits and the feeling of the group. I don't know if I can describe it well enough, but we really are women supporting women. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly close, incredibly respectful. People laugh, cry, they're in their pajamas, they've got their kids there in the background, their dogs in the background, they're out in the garden with their children. It's a really open, wonderful, supportive group. It's a really beautiful thing, So it's very precious to us, and we want to keep it. We want to keep it safe.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And to be clear, and I don't think you thought I was criticizing. That was not me.
No, not at all.
Criticizing that, but to hear you articulate how and why that's so important, because you're right. There are still inclusion gaps.
Yes.
Along lines of gender and race. It's not only still majority men on stage. It's frankly still majority white men on stage, and we have to break that cycle where people don't feel. Where I've heard people say that they don't feel confident or comfortable when they don't see people like them on stage.
Exactly.
It's harder to aspire to that, and the diverse talent of people who can do a great talk at conferences. It's out there. You have to look. To me, this isn't giving a spot to somebody just because they're a woman. It's going and finding women and people of color, and people sometimes outside of. I'll say it. Sometimes the organizations that put on conferences, they have their circle, right? People who've been involved for a long time, and sometimes you got to sort of help chip into that. Yeah. I'm not saying they mean any harm, but it's just natural. Like they have their circle and they're people they're comfortable with. It's I think helpful to try to help others break into that.
Yeah. We want to raise the voices of women in lean and in Kata in the respects of our group. Mm-hmm. And we've seen great benefits from that, and we see what a lovely community, supportive community we have. Yeah. So it's working for us.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. So Gemma, one thing I think this might be kind of the bulk of the episode here. Now that we've gotten to know you and some of your background a little bit, I know you're very interested in looking at overlap of not just continuous improvement, but mental health. You recently did a keynote talk on this. So I really just kind of in a very open-ended way, turn it over to you to share some of your thoughts and experiences about, again, mental health and continuous improvement.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just to give you a bit of context into how this came about. 5 years ago, I was working for a manufacturing organization, and I was the CI manager. I'd had 20 odd years of experience working in CI and lean and operations, and this was, incredibly important to me. So I was working for a company, and one day, very sadly, I came into work to find out that one of my colleagues had died by suicide. Now, this was an enormous shock, incredible, didn't see this coming. I knew I was working very closely with him. I knew he was stressed. I would have said there was 20 other people more stressed than him. Had no idea that he was struggling. So this was an enormous shock. And then, immediately we had to start to figure out how to, look after people, how to cope with this, how to deal with this as an organization. And one of the things I realized very quickly was I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to behave. And so I, quickly started doing research and trying to understand it a bit more. The first thing I learned was the statistics around suicide, and it's terrifying. I mean, absolutely terrifying. There's 800,000 people a year die by suicide. That's more than homicide.
And that's 800,000 people. I'm sorry to interrupt. Geographically,
the whole world. Yeah,
the whole world. Okay,
the whole world, and that's an understatement of the number, because we know it's not reported in some countries, and we know it's at least 800,000 people a year across the world. That's one person every 40 seconds. Now it's terrifying. I also learned that certainly in the UK, if you're a man under 50, your most likely cause of death is suicide. And at the time I had, and I still have, 2 teenage boys and a husband. So I remember the day I learned that statistic, and I came home and I looked at them and thought, all this time I've been worried about you having an accident at school or crossing the road or in the swimming pool. That's what I worry about as a parent. But actually what I really need to be worrying about is what you're thinking and how you're feeling. So it was a really big shock. It led to me leaving and setting up my own business. And one of the first things I did was train in mental health first aid. I felt very strongly that I wanted to be able to know how to respond, what to do, how to help people. And one of the things I learned on that training, and I remember this light bulb moment in my head when I learned this, was that suicidal thoughts are almost always based on unclear thinking. Now, to me, sitting there thinking as a CI professional, that's what we do as CI people. We help people think more clearly, or certainly that's the way, I practice CI. So we've got this army of people around the world of very highly skilled, highly trained CI people. What if we could, help them or encourage them to tune into people, to help them with their thinking about themselves, not just about their processes and their systems? What if we could use some of those CI tools and those CI methods to help people? When I was on the mental health first aider training, I looked around the room and most of the people in the room were from HR. Now, I've got nothing against people from HR, but I know if I was struggling, HR wouldn't be the department that I would run towards. They hold a lot of power in the organization, and I'm just not sure that they're necessarily the best people to be doing that training. Whereas as a CI person, you very often have a very wide reach across an organization, and you're very often in touch with people at all different levels. We very often have strong relationships with people at all different levels and departments of the company. So if those people, could have some of these skills and tools and abilities to look out for symptoms, to know how to signpost people to help, to know the questions to ask, to get people to talk, then I really think there could be a big benefit. So that's basically my mission now. I see it as my mission is to encourage and enable CI people to tune in, to help people think, to overcome obstacles and embrace change. That's kind of my reason for working and being now.
Wow. Well, for one, thank you for being willing, to share that story. I'm sure it's not easy to bring up, maybe easier to bring up in the spirit of helping raise awareness and helping others. When you talk about what you didn't recognize with your colleague, I mean, it makes me think. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in a position of blaming you or anybody for what they did or didn't do. I saw, maybe it was Adam Grant, somebody, there was a post on LinkedIn, this reminder of this idea that, even people we work with a lot, like we generally really only know a very small percentage of what's going on in their life or in their head, or, the totality of stressors or circumstances or other factors. But to that point, I was going to ask you, like, in terms of looking for signs of like when it might be appropriate to try to open a conversation with somebody, and I imagine that could be difficult. But are there ways of sort of, if you will, creating some standard work for a good way of broaching the subject? With somebody.
I mean, and there's the symptoms are fairly, and I'm not a mental health first aider training, so I don't want to replace the need for that. There's some great training available, and there's some free training that I can talk about at the end, and share some links. But in terms of noticing, if you notice someone's behavior is off, if you're noticing they don't see themselves, if they're using words or their body language, or if you're noticing something different in people, the way I like to approach it, or the way I like to encourage people to approach it, is to say exactly that. I notice you're not yourself. Like, and I might not be the right person, but can I get someone who you can talk to? Because again, it depends on your relationship with that person. If they work for you, they might not want to open their heart to you. If you're a manager and they work for another manager, they might not want to be open with you. So I think it's important to acknowledge that you've noticed that it seems like there's something wrong, and then either offer to talk or offer to find someone who they can talk to that they feel safe with. The other thing I'd say there is, even if the answer is no, I'm fine, go in again. Are you sure? Because you really don't seem yourself. Or keep a very close eye and then come in the next day or later on that day. Because very often people will tell you I'm fine, because they think if I keep saying I'm fine, then that means I'm fine. Or actually, I don't really want to talk about it right now. But quite often they'll realize a little bit later, actually, I do need to talk about it. And just that someone's noticed my behavior or noticed the way I am, that shows they care, and they might have a realization that actually they might be able to help. So I think saying that you've noticed the behavior and then going in again and asking and checking is a good idea.
I mean, I imagine people might be surprised by the question. They might not quite know how to respond other than a reflexive I'm fine. It's sort of like the routines of, hey, good morning, how you doing? Oh, I'm great. How are you? Great. Well, I mean, that may or may not be an accurate answer, but given time and space, we're maybe, I imagine maybe somebody gets past that surprise and kind of thinks about it, and then you may find times where they'll come and follow up and say, well, Gemma, you asked yesterday, and I gave it some thought, and they may open up, or you following up with them might lead to that. I mean, at the least, it seems like there's nothing wrong in saying or expressing I care, and we can say this at the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
I care about you. I'm concerned about you. Even language like that would probably be okay.
Yeah, I think so. The other thing I think we can really do, especially as leaders and as CI practitioners, is we can normalize the act of talking about feelings and emotions in the workplace. Because one of the other big things I learned is that for a lot of people, part of the answer is communication, is being able to put into words that you don't feel okay, and being comfortable to do that in a work setting. A lot of people, have been taught, I know I have often kept emotions inside of me for fear of being unprofessional or, kind of exposing myself. And I think part of the issue here is getting people to be comfortable to talk. So I do a lot of that in the work I do, even just in meetings. How did that make you feel? Just asking that question and encouraging people to actually talk about feelings and emotion, getting people used to talking about that. Another example I'll give is when I do process mapping with people, or if I'm training people in process mapping or actually doing an exercise, for every little box on the process map or every sticky note on the wall, I'll ask people to add an emoji about how they feel at that point of that process. And so by getting them to talk about feelings relating to the process, not only does it deepen the knowledge and the understanding of the process, why do you feel angry there? Why do you feel tired there? Why do you feel excited at this point? You get a much deeper understanding of the process. People get a much deeper understanding of each other, but also, more importantly, you're normalizing to talk about emotions in a safe environment like that, in a meeting room, talking with your team about a process. And my theory is, if we can get people more comfortable to talk about it there, maybe they'll be more comfortable, if they're in a point of crisis or they're in a point of really needing help. So I think normalizing talking about emotions, and leaders and managers can do that, every minute of every working day. Just sharing your own emotions, telling people how you feel, make it part of the normal language.
That's great. And, I can think personally, sort of, going on a journey of trying to think through and understand or embrace, as an engineer, there's this bias toward thinking, rational, quantitative, and people might say things like, who this isn't personal, this isn't emotional, this is just business. Like, I don't subscribe to that, because a business is people.
Yeah.
And if we want to talk about, if Toyota phrases like respect for people and respect for humanity, we have to embrace, our human nature, and we are emotional beings. And I think I first, this is one of the thoughts that comes to mind. I'd love to hear your thoughts around this. I saw the beginning of my career, and this goes back to Deming and lean ideas of not wanting people to check their brain at the door. How bad that is. It makes me think of, we shouldn't be asking people to check their heart at the door either.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think having respect for people is about the whole person. Yeah, not just neck upwards, not just brain, but also, like you say, yeah. And I think if we can engage that part of people, we get so much more. Because at the end of the day, we all have emotions, whether we like it or not. We can pretend we don't, and we can pretend that that's messy and we don't want to talk about it and it's difficult. At the end of the day, we all have emotions. We all know how it feels to have to go and do a day's work when something traumatic has happened, or something terrible has happened, or you've had an argument with your spouse or your child, or you've lost your dog or your cat, or a grandparent. We know how that feels to go and try and do the best work we can. And we know how hard that is. And there are people that are going through that every single day. If you're in the US, UK, or Canada, 1 in 5 people, that's 20% of people, 1 in 5 people are struggling with a mental health issue right now. So if you work in a company, for every 100 people you've got in your company, 20 of them are struggling right now.
Yeah.
And we can pretend that's not happening, or we can try and help them and do something about it.
Yeah. And I bet those numbers are pretty broadly similar across different layers of society. If people want to say, well, we're a professional services firm, everyone's so well educated and lives a pretty posh life, if you will, there's still going to be mental health issues.
Well, and even if it's slightly less in that, I mean, I don't know the intricate details of the numbers, but even if it was 3/4 of that, even if it's only 15 people, these are human beings who are working for us or for those organizations, and we know that they're struggling. And I think there's a huge amount we can do to support them, without just thinking, well, it's nothing to do with us, that's their personal life. No, it's not. There's a massive amount we can do.
Yeah. There's a lot that we can do, and I think we could say there's a lot that we should do if we can be comfortable with it. I think I know personally, one thing that's really helped me a lot has been, time working in healthcare, where maybe it's the nature of caring professions, the reality of great life-changing successes and traumatically sad events and sickness and recovery and dying, that I think tends to be generally a little bit more embracing of the impact that can have on our emotions, or the impact of our emotions on some of that work. I'm generalizing, so it's not always going to be true, but I've heard definitely more talk of feelings and emotions in healthcare than, this is going back 25 years ago, than I would really ever remember at, say, a General Motors factory. I can't imagine the reaction if I had tried. And I love what you were sharing about, tell me how you feel about, like, I don't think that would have gone well.
No, and there's, I still work in environments now where you can sort of hear the gasp, or you can hear that there's people resistance, but I stick at it and I still keep asking the question until people get so bored of me asking. I get the leaders to demonstrate, this is what this is what we're looking for, this is the language we're looking for, and humor me, and just keep going, because like I say, we all have feelings. Let's just learn how to talk about them in a safe way, and know that we're safe to do that. And again, there's a big onus there on the leadership to be receptive to that, and to receive that in the right way and deal with that in the right way and encourage it in the right way. So there's a lot. It's not just as simple as getting people to talk about how they feel. We also have to make sure that we're working with that.
I mean, how often do you end up prompting somebody to the point where the first emotion they share is either, let's say, I feel skeptical about talking about our emotion, or Gemma, I feel frustrated that you can. I mean, that's a start.
It's
not really what you're going for, but it's a start, right?
Yeah. One of the things I do is I teach people how to draw emojis, because we've all got emojis now in our phones. Yeah, we all use them. I think it's something like 85% of people below the age of 80 or something use emojis every single day in their communication. So we're used to using emojis in personal communication. Let's get used to using them in a work setting. Yeah. So I teach people how to draw very simplified emojis with just a few lines, and I give them a big poster showing, here's 9 different emojis that kind of cover a spectrum of emotions. Pick one. So even if they can't put it into words and they're not really sure, pick one of these and tell me which one is closest. And sometimes that can just help. Yeah. So they're not having to come up with the words. They can kind of look at the one that feels most appropriate. So again, it's about giving them the language.
Yeah. And so when it comes to language, for one, I want to thank you. We did have a previous conversation, before we were recording the episode here today. You were the first person that I had heard this phrase, mental health first aid, from.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for that, and we can kind of come back to. I know people, I'm sure, can go and search, but we'll come back and get some of your tips, as you had said you would share about where to go get training on this. But I think there's also language to explore. When a couple of minutes ago you talked about people feeling safe, and that's really important when it comes to language around psychological safety in a workplace. Feeling safe to speak up about a problem, feeling safe to admit a mistake, feeling safe to have a Kaizen idea, and that also includes feeling safe to express emotions. And there are times when I've done talks or webinars, or even like within a team, you can survey people, and it's interesting to have people rank to them personally of some of these different acts, which are the most vulnerable to you personally, meaning which feel the most risky or dangerous. Yeah. And usually within giving people a list of 10 or 15 things to rank, generally speaking, admitting a mistake to a lot of people feels very dangerous. And I think that's unfortunate. Yeah. And that's an opportunity for leaders to help them feel safe. We can't just tell them, be brave. Yeah. You have to admit mistakes. They don't have to. But the other thing that ranks very high in that list is expressing emotions. Yeah. Where people feel like that is risky to them professionally. Yeah. To get labeled as being too emotional, or being chastised for being upset about something, which maybe isn't good root cause problem solving if we don't think about, well, why was this upsetting to you? Because we're humans, we get upset sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as leaders, people have an opportunity to demonstrate and show how that can work, to not only receive, if people do talk about emotions, receive that in a supportive, neutral, non-judgmental way, but also to show the same, to self-disclose, to share some of your own emotions, to make it more normal, to make it more part of the culture, and to make people feel more safe to do so. Because you're right, there can be repercussions. I can think of times when I have shared my emotions when I was younger, and it was not I was not supported, and it didn't go well, and I was told off for being too emotional. I was, so I can think of times when that hasn't worked for me because the environment was not supportive.
And that's happened to me, not just when I was younger, but even sometimes in more recent years. And that can be doubly upsetting then. At some point, hopefully we all learn in life, and this I think applies to personal relationships. You can't tell somebody how to feel. Don't try to tell someone they should be or shouldn't be feeling a certain way. No.
And we can't tell people how they are feeling. And, absolutely. If someone trusts you enough to share with you how they're feeling, we need to learn how to respect that, receive that, and support that, and then figure out what we need to do to help them going forwards.
Mm-hmm. Is there an opportunity to apply? I brought up this phrase root cause, to ask why questions or use other problem solving frameworks. Not saying that the emotion is the problem, but trying to drill down. What have you been able to experiment with or find helpful? So what I have found helpful, actually, and this is a bit controversial in the lean world, but is to try and avoid the question why. Asking someone why can lead them to feel defensive, because it's almost being judgmental and critical, or it can be received as being judgmental and critical. And also, I think if you're asking the question why, it can lead to you giving solutions or being direct. Why don't you try this? Why haven't you done this? But those aren't really questions.
Those aren't really questions. Those are instructions. So consciously, I try to stay away from the word why, but instead asking more open questions like, what happens when, or what leads you to feel like this, or, what it's kind of what questions and how questions and when questions rather than why. And I think that's sounds like a really small shift, but it can make a massive difference in how someone hears that question. If they're feeling vulnerable and emotional, the last thing they want is to feel judged. Right. Yes, they might need some help getting to root cause, and we can ask deepening questions to try and get to root cause. What is it that's making you feel frustrated? What about that is making you feel angry, whatever. We can ask questions to try and peel back some of the layers, but also we have to make sure we're respectful when we do that. Someone's feeling frustrated and they can't articulate why. That's okay. They're still feeling frustrated. And that doesn't mean that their feelings are not valid just because right now they can't articulate it. When we're super stressed and emotional, our powers of reasoning are diminished because we're probably in a fight or flight situation, and we're not necessarily able to think that clearly. And as a manager, as a leader, as a CI person, as a mentor, as a coach, we've got to understand that. Just because someone can't explain it doesn't mean it's not real, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but we can try and help them to figure it out. I think some of the techniques that we use as CI people, the mapping, the drawing, let's draw a picture of how this is working. Some of that can really help bring someone's stress level down and help them to articulate things.
And it just makes me think of core Kaizen principles around sometimes you take baby steps, or we could frame this in terms of Kata. We can see, our challenge and what are some next steps that we're going to take to try to incrementally move us along. I think the same thing is true of psychological safety. You don't go from a complete extreme lack of psychological safety to a perfectly safe environment, like flipping a switch. It's a journey. It takes progressive steps and learning and adjustment along.
Absolutely. And if I think about, referencing this to Kata, that's the majority of my work now. It's kind of my passion. I think Kata is the best way to learn how to think.
Mhm.
We set a challenge in Kata, but then the next step, the second step before we start moving forwards, is to grasp our current condition.
Right.
And I think that's where there's some real power in understanding a situation or an activity, something that's happening that's leading someone to not feeling good.
Mhm.
Let's dig into it and really understand the current condition. What is going on? What is happening? Who is involved? Who's not involved? When does it happen? When does it not happen? Really starting to dig deep and research that current condition can really help before we even need to think about, right, what are we going to do? So yeah, I think those principles can really help us to do that.
Mhm. You've already answered the question that I would ask, but as an opportunity to try to practice some of this. If I were to ask Gemma, why avoid the word why? I don't know if that would make you defensive about
Yeah.
asking why, but there I think are other ways of asking it, like or even a prompt, like it's not technically a question, but like, well, tell me about some of the ways different people might react to a why question. Like maybe that language is a little less accusatorial.
Yeah, absolutely. You're depersonalizing it by, tell me some ways that other people
Mm-hmm.
might feel. Yeah, you're taking it away from that person and you're making it to more, humans in general. I think that's a really good way to reduce some of that defensiveness, because you're not answering on behalf of yourself. You're then answering on behalf of, imaginary people or all of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, and when you talk about depersonalizing things, I mean, I think the why question really triggers defensiveness. And I think, again, it's understandably so. Why did you?
Yeah.
I think
Why
the
did
why
you?
and the you, right? So you can think of like trying to do root cause analysis. I think of, one of the stories in my book about a wrong site surgery, and probably not a helpful question to ask the resident surgeon. Why did you cut into the wrong side of the patient? Right. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really that's to me, that's an accusation. I mean, yes, I mean that it's a fact that the resident in this story, and this happens far too often, cut into the wrong side of the patient. But when we anchored around why did you, it seemed like we're no longer talking
Yeah.
about systems. Like what allowed that to happen?
Yeah.
Or I think even asking, well, I'll say I almost with the why. What could be done to prevent that from happening again?
Happening again. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, we should focus on the process, not the person, um, and yeah, by switching the questions to sort of force us to focus on the process rather than the people.
Mm-hmm.
That can really help that. But yeah, and to stop that level of, because it's human nature,
Mm-hmm.
if someone's asked why did you do that, that's our human nature, is to get defensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, trying to depersonalize it,
Mm-hmm.
go heavy on the process and
Yeah.
light on the person.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of this defensiveness happens. One thing I challenge in lean practice, if you will, is what a lot of people call a bowling chart, of a list of 12 months, 12 numbers, instead of a chart, as I'm trying to draw with my finger here. Instead of a line chart, it's a list of numbers that may or may not be color coded in some way. And if I challenge that, and sometimes people say, well, but that's what my sensei taught me to do last year. So it's not even a matter of quote unquote, we've always done it that way,
Yeah.
but that's how I was taught. And I can see where now with the whys situation, I've been taught, others have, but I've been taught why questions are good. We should ask why 5 times or whatever that number ends up being. But I think there's a story going back to Toyota history, as it's told. I'm sure you've heard it, Gemma, and a lot of our listeners have, of Toyota's evolution and some language around mistake proofing. Of supposedly they were referring to it as bakayoke, or and which means more or less foolproofing or idiot proofing. And the story goes that somebody in the factory got upset and said, "Well, I'm not a fool. Well, so there's some emotion, there's some feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
And that Toyota adjusted to calling it poke-yoke or poke-yoke. We debate the pronunciation of that, I guess, too. But to focus on mistake or error, but even those words can be really loaded if people feel like they're being blamed.
Yeah, well, it sounds like judgment. It sounds like blame. It could, I mean, it depends on the culture and the context, I would guess. But yeah, it can be. Mistake has a, that's got an emotional feeling to the word mistake, I believe. And yeah, I believe we should focus on where the process is falling down. What in the process allowed this mistake, this incident, this thing to happen.
Yeah.
And try and take it away from the people. It's funny, most of my work is talking about how it's all about the people, but then a lot of the focus is like, we need to make it all about the process.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean we can do both. I don't think it has to be.
We need to do
choice.
both.
Instead of being hard on people, we can engage them and understand them and
support them,
ask about them. But yeah, two other words while we're playing the game of naming words that can trigger an emotional response. Problem.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I think it's second nature in Toyota. It seems like they throw that word around. Like problem has the same emotional weight as Post-it note. Like it's a thing. It exists.
It's a thing.
But boy, some workplaces, people will beg and plead. Can we use any word other than problem to describe a problem? Like if that's what it takes, that's a baby step that's necessary. Okay, or the word defect.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think it comes down to culture. If the culture has been about, we are allowed, encouraged, we're safe. If we admit there's been a problem, then their reaction to the word is probably going to be better than if, we had a problem and, the order went down, the customer left, we lost loads of money. If you've been, if there's been big issues with problems in the past, if people have been disciplined because of problems or because of defects, then people can link, problems happen, we get in trouble, or problems happen, there is trouble. And then immediately people will close up and they won't share, they won't talk about it, they won't try to highlight or uncover problems because history has shown them, experience has shown them that bad things happen.
Right.
So and that's why a lot of things get covered up, I believe, and I think that happens, and I saw it an awful lot in manufacturing.
Yes,
people
happens.
They know what's happening, they know how it happens, they just don't want to talk about it because they know bad things happen.
Right, and they don't feel safe because it's been demonstrated that it's not safe. Yeah, it's not an unfounded fear, and it happens too much in healthcare. And again, I'm never blaming the people who choose not to speak up, because sometimes, I mean, look, it's human nature. You'll protect yourself as much as someone would want to lecture about professional obligation. And we have to help people feel safe. And I think that's the emotion. And we'll tie it back to, I'm glad you brought up Dr. Deming, who said, eliminate fear.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's that foundation for your education and career and mine as well. So, Gemma, as we wrap up here, I mean, kind of one maybe general point and then the specific question about where to find some of this training. It seems like it might be possible to incorporate some of this discussion around, let's say, mental health or people's feelings into discussions around safety and a priority on not just physical safety, but a broader view of safety.
I think so. I guess yes, absolutely could be. I guess my hesitation is that, and I don't know how to say it. I'm not going to say this very well, I don't think, but that in manufacturing, certainly there's often an attitude towards health and safety that isn't necessarily positive. It's a bit of a roll of the eyes, or, oh gosh, yes, now we have to, there's, because the experience is having lots of things layered on them that makes their life harder. Now, yes, it makes their life better, and yes, it reduces accidents, and we all know how important that is. but sometimes there is an immediate reaction to the concept of health and safety. So I guess I would be hesitant to connect. I think it is connected, physical safety and mental health, physical health and mental health, very closely linked.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I just want to be careful there that it didn't get rolled up in the normal health and safety kind of world.
So as with many things, yeah, it depends on the situation and the circumstances of a workplace, of a company.
Exactly. Depends on the culture, depends how, so I've seen companies do health and safety brilliantly, really brilliantly. They have a great attitude towards it, really progressive, modern thinking, engaging. I've seen other companies do it terribly and nobody wants to talk about it. And it's seen as a burden and something that makes life hard. Yeah. Again, the same, I think it's all about context and environment. I feel very strongly that I believe there's an army of CI people around the world who can really help bring a level of clarity and a level of thinking to people, as well as helping them think about processes, focus on helping them think about themselves. I want to encourage as many CI people to go and do mental health first aider training. It's not expensive. It's not long. It doesn't mean you need to be a counselor, by the way. It doesn't mean you're fixing people. Just like a physical first aider, if you're a physical first aider, you see someone with a cut on their arm, or they've broken their arm, or they've hurt themselves. You're not a surgeon. You're not going to try and put them back together. You're not a medic. You're not you're not a doctor, but you're going to notice that there's a problem. You're going to kind of look after them and you're going to get them to help. That's exactly what a mental health first aider is doing. Yeah. You know what to look out for, you know how to respond, and you know where to take them or where to, encourage them to go to get help. And you know what to do to get them in the best situation. So it's not about worrying about, I can't be a counselor or I can't help people. I'm not, It's not about that. It's knowing what to look for.
Yeah.
So I want as many CI people to do mental health first aider training as I can possibly get.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that analogy. That really makes a lot of sense. And it's with the language is designed to draw that parallel. How, maybe, the final question here, how did you find or decide where to get this training? Do you have a specific recommendation for others in the UK? How might the rest of us, we can go and Google the phrase, but any tips or guidance around like what to look for, of how long a program should be, or the format? What would you look for?
So the way I found mine is I actually came across somebody, a mental health first aider trainer at a conference. He delivered a really excellent session, which was, he somehow managed to make the subject of mental health first aid funny, which I found really quite intriguing. He talked about some really difficult, deep subjects, but made it very funny. So I went and introduced myself to him and said, I want to come on your course, and luckily he was fairly local to me. But I think most countries have a mental health first aid organization. So you want it to be accredited training. So I think Googling that for whichever country you're in would be a good idea. The training I did was 2 days long, and then I've done a refresher 2 years later, and I'm going to do another refresher every 2 years going forward. So it's not long training. It's not lengthy. It can be online as well. I know there's some virtual training for the same course online. It is pretty hard going, I will say, and I found it quite hard. Certainly the parts about suicide awareness were very, very tender and very difficult, but well worth. And I found it useful in lots of aspects of my life as a coach, consultant, trainer, and also parent and wife and friend. So yeah, I think it's really powerful stuff. If people go to my website, there is a resources page on which you can find a link to a mural that I've put together. Mural is a digital whiteboard, and there's a whole set of resources on there designed for CI people who want to know better, how to help. That's what it's called, how to help. One of the links on there is for some free suicide awareness training. It's not from me. It's run through the NHS in the UK. It's fantastic training. It's only 20 minutes to half an hour. But it's open to anyone across the world. And that's truly brilliant. And that's free. And it's half an hour.
Right.
I'd really recommend people look at that as a first step. And there's some links on there as well to mental health organizations in different countries where you can find training.
Okay. Well, thank you. And we do have listeners in dozens of countries. So I hope people will look for some local resources. I'll make sure the show notes have a link to your website, Gemma, and what you mentioned there. Resources in particular for people in the UK, the US, and Canada, kind of where a lot of my listeners do come from, but important topics and important ideas for everybody. So really, thank you for being willing to talk about these topics, to share your story and things that you've done and learned, and the spirit of helping others. So thank you for that. I was going to ask you as we wrap up here, how do you feel? Now that we're wrapping up the episode here, how do you feel, Gemma?
I love the way you did that, by the way, Mark. That's very clever. I feel very grateful that you've had me on to talk about it, that you're open to me talking about it. This isn't an easy subject. Mm-hmm. I know it's not an easy thing to talk about. I think it's really important, so I'm really grateful. I'm really pleased to be talking to more people. My mission is to talk to as many CI people as possible. So I'm incredibly grateful and pleased to have done that today.
Okay. Well, I'm grateful you would share your feelings with me. I was prepared to share how I feel. Now I'm going to be clever by saying I feel clever. Which was not really that was not my primary motivation there. But I feel hopeful that the awareness that you're creating through keynote talks and other efforts, and by being here today, one thing I feel is hopeful that we can help others help other people, and I feel grateful. So this has been really nice. So again, we're joined today, Gemma Jones. I'll put links in the show notes, and for people to reach out and follow up with you on all of these topics. So again, thank you so much for doing this.
You're really welcome. Thank you so much for having me.